Welcome to Women Who Kick Glass, the podcast that dives into the fearless women who changed history and the fights that are still shaping our world today. From suffragists to civil rights activists, these women refuse to back down, breaking barriers and demanding change. And now, here's your host, an advocate, a storyteller, and a woman who kicks glass herself, Ann Potenza.
We know her as Sojourner Truth, but she was born as Isabella Baumfree in 1797, and her family called her Belle. She was born to enslaved parents, and she was born into slavery. When she was an infant, her 5-year-old brother and her 3-year-old sister were both sold to other houses for slavery. Her family would talk about the children that were sold into slavery, and it was at a young age that her mom taught her and her brothers and sisters how to pray. So praying was very important to get through these times in her life. Now, can you imagine what you were doing at 9 years old? Well, Isabella was sold into another household when she was 9 years old, and her worth to her new master was $100 and a flock of sheep. That's what she was worth when she was sold. And 2 years later, she was sold to another master. At 11 years old, that first master made an extra $5 on her and sold her for $105 to a tavern keeper. And at 13 years old, she was sold to another master who continuously raped her. It's hard to believe that she would even find love in that type of situation. And at 18 years old, Isabella did find love. She fell in love with another slave from another farm, but they couldn't be together because there was no way that they would have someone from another farm marry someone and not own both of them. So this man that Isabella fell in love with from another farm, his name was Robert, and he tried to come over and still visit her, but they were found out. And he was caught, he was beat up, and he was sent away. And Isabella heard a couple of years after that he died. And it always stayed with her. She never forgot about it. And she was forced to marry someone that was a slave on the farm where she was. So she married another slave named Thomas, and they wound up having 5 children. And they had their first child, but he was a boy and he died early in childhood. Her second child was a girl, but it wasn't Thomas's child. It was actually the slave owner's child. So she gave birth to her master's child and raised the baby as if it was Thomas's and hers. Her third and fourth and fifth children were also born within close years of each other. And they were all enslaved. That's what happened in those days. You would marry the slave that was on the same property of you, and you would have children, and those children became slaves to the master. But freedom was never far from her mind. Believe it or not, when she was 2 years old, New York had started working on their emancipation laws way before the Civil War. But it took until she was 29 years old that actually came to fruition. And the year before emancipation was declared in New York, Isabella was promised from her slave master that she would be free the year after it became into effect. But when that time came, her owner said, no, you know what? I'm going to change my mind. I'm not going to let you go. So the reason he gave to her that he wasn't going to let her go was he didn't think he got enough work out of her because she had a hand injury, and he said she didn't work hard enough for him. So she was so furious, but so determined to prove him wrong, that even with her bad hand, she spun 100 pounds of wool just to prove that she could do it. So soon after that, she decided to escape to freedom. And all she could do was take her infant daughter, and she had to make the crucial choice of leaving her other children behind. She did. She left them behind, and she found out later that one of her children was sold to another farm in another state, which actually was illegal in those days. So she took her daughter, and she walked with her daughter in her arms almost 12 miles to this family that she knew were abolitionists, and she was hoping that they would have some empathy and sympathy and take her in. And they did. And when she got there, they actually did let her in, and they did take her in, and they gave $20 to her master to buy her freedom. This family wasn't just sympathetic to Isabella's situation. They helped her get her son back. Isabella used their last name, and they went to the New York Supreme Court, and Isabella filed a lawsuit against her old slave master, and she won. So she was the very first Black woman to ever win a case against a white man. And she won and got her 5-year-old son Peter back. The family that helped give Isabella her freedom also made a profound impact on her spirituality, and that inspired her to want to start preaching and sharing her faith with others. She wound up moving to New York and worked as a housekeeper for a preacher, so she was exposed to what it was like to be around and to be at the religious revivals and give speeches. And soon after that, she started working for another preacher. And then all of a sudden she realized she had a knack for preaching. So it was at this time that she became the Sojourner Truth that we know. She changed her name to Sojourner because sojourner means to travel and to not be in one place for very long. And truth was so that she can speak out against slavery and oppression. And this became her mission for the rest of her life. Sojourner told her friends that she heard God calling her and telling her that she needed to go out and to speak the truth. And her journey started leading her towards Massachusetts. And she became part of an organization in Massachusetts. And at one of these times when she was planning to be part of the sermon amongst other preachers, a whole group of these rowdy young men came to the camp where they were, and they started booing and hissing her, and they were trying not to let her speak, and they were harassing her. And she was really scared at first, and she went into her tent and she hid because she knew she was the only Black woman out of all these people she was with, and she was afraid for her life. And she prayed on it, and she said, you know what? I am not going to be scared. And she went out there and she started singing. She just started singing a song. So she didn't preach at first. She just started singing a song, a religious, beautiful song about Christ. And before long, those raucous kids, the people who were giving her a hard time, they started listening to her. They started singing along with her. They actually continued when she was done to ask her if they could keep listening to her sing. So she found that not only through her preaching, which was her cause, but that her voice of singing was also another way and another instrument to bring people in. After this incident, Sojourner continued with her preaching, and she traveled in other parts of Massachusetts. And there was this one organization that she became a member of, and it was an organization that never had more than a couple of hundred people, and it was mixed of men and women, and it was all people who had this same purpose of trying to get the word out for the abolishment of slavery. And it was at this group when her job was to be in charge of the laundry. So she was in charge of this laundry because everyone would pitch in and do different jobs, almost like communal living in a way. And it was here that she met another very important abolitionist in history, and his name was Frederick Douglass. And Frederick was part of the abolition movement. He later on became a key person in the women's movement, and it was at this point in Sojourner's life when they became friends and they connected on a lot of the same purpose. Here she is surrounded by these amazing, like-minded people like Frederick Douglass and other abolitionists who are now teaching her about the anti-slavery movement. And so she soon realized, I'm going to use my voice to help with that. And so this was the instrumental time where she changed from speaking about the word of God and her faith, and she directed her energy to start speaking about anti-slavery. Sojourner not only gave her first anti-slavery speech that year, but then the Civil War started, and she was in the middle of the Civil War. So what did she do? She started recruiting Black men from the North to fight for the Union. She was actually active recruiter. And so who hears about Sojourner while she's in Washington, D.C.? None other than the President of the United States, President Lincoln. He hears the work she's doing with the abolitionist movement. He loves finding out that she is recruiting the Black men to join the Union Army and to fight with the North. And he invites her to the White House. And while she's there, he brings out a Bible to share and show her how important this gift was to him. And he got that Bible from African Americans in Baltimore. When the Civil War was over, Sojourner was not done with her work. She went on to gather signatures for a petition that was to uphold the promise that was made by General Sherman after the North won the Civil War. There was 400,000 acres of land previously owned by slave owners that was to go to the newly freed Negroes. And that was part of the order. It was part of the 40 acres and a mule that we hear about now. What it meant was that no freed family was to get more than 40 acres, but that 400,000 should be split amongst almost 18,000 freed slaves. And they were to be given land, and they were to be given a mule. And it didn't happen the way it was supposed to be. That's why Sojourner helped gather the petition, presented it to Congress to uphold it. But there was a new president now, and he overturned that promise. 2 years after the Civil War ended, Sojourner was not done speaking. She was still out there speaking against discrimination, speaking against oppression, and she got to start speaking again on behalf of women's rights. She had been to the women's rights conventions that happened way before the Civil War started. And it was at the Ohio Women's State Convention when Sojourner gave her famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" And this was a speech from the point of view of an enslaved woman and how her rights should be the same rights as every other American. And this became her keynote speech that she went around on the lecture tour and shared this speech. And it was powerful. It was simple and to the point. And it was another convention a couple of years later when she started getting booed and hissed. Because you have to think, these women were having these conventions, but they were open to anyone who wanted to be there. So people who didn't want women to have the vote would go there and try to discourage them and try to bully them and yell at them and keep the women from speaking. It wasn't all roses and, beautiful times. It was hard work. When these women were out there trying to convince people why they were worthy to have the vote, there were others who were trying to go right back at them and browbeat them down. So at this particular convention, when she was being booed and hissed by the men, she said, "You can boo and hiss me all you want, but women are going to get the vote anyway." But that wasn't the end. The whole circuit tour, there was always booing and hissing and people trying to shout down these women, like trying to stop their voices. Sound familiar? But it didn't stop her. She even pulled in her religious preaching back and she would shout at them, "Honor thy mother and thy father." So she spoke her truth. She was so perfectly suited to the name she chose for herself. And lo and behold, at one of her next speeches at the American Equal Rights Association, instead of boos and hisses, she was met with cheers and applause. So something changed, and she took it. And while she was there, she made 3 major points in her speech. So the first part of her speech, she was focusing on the rights of Black women, because The black men had gotten their rights to vote, and she really wanted the black women to get their rights too. She was like, while we're stirring things up, while things are happening, like, don't let it get cold. Let's keep going. Let's get the black women the right to vote too. She wanted all women, but she was really focusing on the black women because that's who she personally represented. In the second part of her speech, she concentrated on the rights of all women getting the vote. She read a verse from the Bible to make her point, and at the end, she argued that men were very self-centered, and let's read this. Man is so selfish that he has got women's rights and his own too, and yet he won't give women their rights. He keeps them all to himself. And then the final part of her speech was really focusing on women's rights to vote. Sojourner explained that she owned her house, as did other women, and they paid their taxes, but because they were women, they weren't allowed to vote. Then she spoke about the enslaved women who did hard labor like building roads, and obviously they didn't get the right to vote. So her very last point was, if women were able to do tasks as hard as this, isn't it a lot easier for them to at least be able to vote? Because surely voting is a lot easier than building roads. So what is the legacy of Sojourner Truth? It's simple. It's fight for equality. Some people might want to paint her as being a radical and speaking out against the norm, but really everything she spoke about was equality. She believed African Americans deserve the same rights as others. She believed that women deserve the same rights as others when it came to voting. Sojourner Truth left behind a legacy of courage, faith, and fighting for what's right and honorable. It's her own words that sum up what her life meant. This is what she said. Children, who made your skin white? Was it not God? Who made mine black? Was it not the same God? Am I to blame, therefore, because my skin is black? Does not God love colored children as well as white children? And did not the same Savior die to save the one as well as the other? You know, when Sojourner passed away, she's been remembered. She's been remembered as the forefront of the women's movement, as her work with the abolishment of slavery. And as she's been honored, there's this one statue in her hometown, and it's of a little girl who's standing there. It's her as a child. She's about 9 years old. It's when she was Isabella Baumfree, and she's standing there. And it was made to remind us that she was a child born into slavery and sold many times over. And the thing is today, child slavery still exists. And this is supposed to bring attention to that. The ILO, which stands for the International Labor Organization, has estimated that in our world, we have over 160 million children between the ages of 5 and 17 in child labor, and half of them are in hazardous conditions. They also estimate that there's nearly 28 million people in forced labor, and that doesn't even scratch the surface. Sex trafficking can be happening in your own backyard. It's not just in other countries. It's here. And we can learn about it and know about it. And there are ways that we can help prevent it. So please check out our website, womenwhokickglass.com. We have resources there for you to check out. And until next week, keep kicking glass.
Thanks for listening to Women Who Kick Glass. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more, contact the show. Visit womenwhokickglass.com. Women Who Kick Glass is executive produced by Lou Valentino. Written by Lou Valentino and Ann Potenza. Until next time, keep kicking glass.